Thank you, councillors. We have a quorum, so I will move that we reconvene the meeting. Seconded, Councillor Newell. All in favour? Carried. Chris, welcome to the table, and we look forward to your submission.
Kia ora tātou, Deputy Mayor, Chair and Councillors. I'd just like to reiterate what was stated in the overview to our submission, which you no doubt would have read. This provides a general summary of our main points. Generally, the DCC Draft Annual Plan 2019-20 shows that Council is making some progress towards creating a more inclusive and accessible community where everyone can participate, including disabled people, as envisaged by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, and the New Zealand Disability Strategy 2016 to 2026. However, there needs to be more progress made in some areas, such as on pedestrian infrastructure, such as curb cuts, and on the use of fully accessible communications and in technology to convey important council information. Nonetheless, the DPA Dunedin have been pleased to be fully involved in discussions on the CBD George Street upgrade plans. DPA believes that the means in which this project has been consulted on is a model which should be followed by other DCC departments and indeed other councils and government agencies. From our perspective, the Dunedin disability community have been fully engaged in this process, and we wish to commend the urban design team for the way in which they have so far dealt with all stakeholders involved in this process throughout the community. DPA Dunedin would like to particularly point out that as a result of last year's Access for All forum, during which we were pleased to see attendance from a number of US City councillors and also officials, a permanent working group by the same name is currently being set up to work with both the city and regional councils and other access stakeholders to advocate for and collaborate on accessibility-related projects. Currently, this group is comprised of representatives from Disabled Persons Assembly, Blind Citizens Otago, People First, we are all disabled persons organisations run largely by and for disabled people, and also CCS Disability Action and Disability Information Service. The group will also be welcoming other disability and accessibility stakeholder organisations to eventually join after decisions around the structure of the group are finalised. This grouping will operate independently of both the Dunedin City Council and the Otago Regional Council, but we will liaise closely with both councils. The Disability Issues Advisory Group, the DCC Disability Issues Advisory Group, DAG, will continue to operate as an advisory group with whom council with some overlap expected in membership and issues covered between the two. In this document, we have particularly commented on proposed transport changes, plans for the Sinclair Esplanade, the proposed peninsular collection, rubbish and recycling, and improvement to tracks and access to information and communications, particularly around the accessibility of this very annual plan and other important documents. We will also, and have also rather, reiterated our call that Dunedin local government elections, including the forthcoming one, should move to electronic voting, or failing that, telephone dictation voting as used at general elections. DPA Dunedin wishes to point out that the views expressed in our submission relate to the following points of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. We are a party as a country to that convention. We point out that the relevant articles of the convention are those pertaining to equality and non-discrimination, Article 5, accessibility to the built environment, Article 9, transport and personal mobility, Articles 9 and 20, communication and information, Article 21, participation in political and public life, Article 29, and participation in recreational, sporting, leisure and cultural life, Article 30. For further information, I've provided the link to the convention that all councillors, I hope, have read or studied at some length. I really encourage you, if you haven't done so, to familiarise yourself with the document. Now I'm open to taking questions on our submission. Chair.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ford, for your, as always, comprehensive submission. Can I just ask one question about the proposal for the inner city bus loop, which you support? If that proceeds, and on the basis of the feedback we've had in the process, it is highly likely to, I suspect. But the initial proposal was to trial it, to test it with the community, and while there would be every intent to get an appropriate accessible vehicle, that might not be available in the first instance till we prove the concept. Is that something you could live with if that's the circumstance?
Well, we would prefer that it be accessible from the first. Well, even it's been trialled, but I guess that I think it needs to be trialled with everyone. I think that if there is a will, there is a way. That's the old saying. I believe that if an accessible vehicle can be found, yes,
well,
it should be found for a trial.
I'm not suggesting that
yeah.
we wouldn't try, but I'm just saying in terms of finding what's available for an appropriate trial vehicle, that might be problematic in the short term, but it would certainly not be our long-term wish.
Of course, but I think at the same time that any trial should also incorporate, if that is possible,
Fair
an
enough.
accessible vehicle.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Chris. Look, I just wanted to know, you made a comment about the e-scooters in your presentation, and I'm just wondering if the people you're representing generally are having troubles with them being left on footpaths now. Is it causing a problem?
Yes, it is. I can state that myself. I've seen it. I'm getting so bloody angry about this because people are being very, very inconsiderate. I think really that the introduction of Lime e-scooters was a bad idea, to be quite honest, in terms of the way in which it was done. There was no real appropriate consultation with potentially impacted groups such as pedestrian groups, pedestrian user groups, such as I'm also, by the way, but I'm not speaking on their behalf today, the co-convener of the Pedestrian Action Network. But I can say that as one example, the other day I was just outside the physio pool. I usually go there once a week. I came out of the car park and just in the middle of the footpath, just outside the car park, I could see one Lime scooter just left right in the middle of a pathway. That is really obstructive. And really, I do suggest as well that the Lime e-scooter company should be charged a fee, as has been suggested at all.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks for your submission, Chris. Just touching, actually follow up on Councillor Benson-Pope's comment and comments that often talk about the size of buses right now is to accommodate basically wheelchair access to the bus. What do you think about the idea of pushing back and saying surely we should be able to achieve, not to the circular bus, but basically to the size of these enormous buses that we see right now, the ability to have a kneeling bus that can take wheelchairs that doesn't have to be the length of an intercity transport vehicle?
That would be good if there are such bus designs available. It's really quite important to stress as well that bus accessibility is an important issue for people across the impairment spectrum. And I'm also talking about, in this instance, blind and visually impaired people who need to have, for example, audio announcements on bus routes. That isn't currently in place, insofar as I understand. And as well as that, also ensuring that there is signage to enable deaf and hearing impaired people, and I'm hearing impaired myself now, to make sure that there is visual signage. All of those sorts of things need to be incorporated into accessible bus design. So having an accessible bus that not only takes wheelchair users but also people with invisible impairments, mobility impairments, who find it difficult to utilise, or say, ordinary vehicles, but having an accessible bus is quite important for people across the impairment spectrum.
Excellent. You mentioned that I think it's fair to say that you've had good interactions with future designs on things like the George Street upgrade and stuff like that. Yes. But you did mention curb cuts, and you know that we've done some work on that, and because this is a budget meeting, what would you like us to consider that as part of the annual curb cut budget, that the disabled groups get to have some say in, say, some proportion of that, to prioritise them based on the end users' experiences of where they think they could have a major impact?
Yes, that absolutely. It's really quite important that we're involved in the co-design of any accessibility features, such as mobility curb cuts, and indeed in all issues pertaining to accessibility. I think that's quite important, that the voice of disabled people is heard, and that should be involved, not just as a means of consultation alone, but also involvement in that process from woe to go.
Excellent. And then the last one is on the election front.
Yes.
The census showed that maybe going electronic is not necessarily going to be guaranteed to do everything, and I know we're not going electronic for this election, but would you want through either this organisation the group you're just starting, or somebody at least in the community, to be able to liaise with the council so that people who have difficulties voting under the current modality can get assistance to make sure their vote is cast?
Well, as we've suggested in our submission, the other alternative is telephone dictation voting, which was utilised successfully in the last general election for the first time, and that's usable and that's important not only for people who are blind and visually impaired, but also it's useful for people who have communication impairment of some description, who have difficulty with voting for any reason. It's quite user-friendly in that respect, but I think that the council should seriously consider both electronic voting eventually. I do know that there are issues with that, but we do have a member of DPA who is two members, who are very, very proficient in this area, who are specialists, who can provide that type of advice to council, and that includes on making electronic voting accessible and available. Eventually it will happen once all of the obvious issues are worked out, but at the end of the day, that's what we would prefer, and we say this because disabled people are sometimes denied the right to exercise their votes in secret, as part of a secret ballot which we all treasure and cherish. and under the UN Convention, under Article 29 on democratic participation, on political participation, we have the right to cast our votes, to participate in electoral and other political processes in an equitable way. And in that sense, we need an accommodation around that, and that accommodation is electronic voting and or telephone voting or other means.
Given that we're getting near our election, then would you like us to consider the telephone voting for this election round?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, for your efforts and your thorough submission. I have a question that was somewhat prompted by a visitor whose both parents were non-speaking, and she had grown up learning sign language, and the discussion was around sign language. And she made the comment that visitors, when they were visiting places, they'd often inquire about provisions for people with disabilities, and the immediate reaction from those organisations would be, and this was in another country, that they assumed the person was in a wheelchair, and that has been my experience as well. How well understood is the term disability, do you think, amongst organisations you deal with, and decision-making organisations in particular?
I think it does vary. I think that where we come from just very quickly is the social model of disability, whereby it is society itself that creates the barriers, both attitudinal, environmental and other, towards the participation of people with impairments such as myself, For example, when my parents meet barriers such as environmentally designed buildings and so forth, we encounter issues with that. Let me just give you one example. I don't know, are there any electronic door openers in this building? Because I have to come through, when I come through a set of doors, for example, I had to sort of bang into them and then open them that way. Whereas at the university, just as an example of how you can make an environment less disabling and processes less disabling, there are electronic door openers throughout the registry building and other buildings on campus, for example. So really it's about the fact that, just coming back to the question that you asked, it does vary. And I think that, you know, the DCC does and has done quite a bit of work with the disability community, but there's always more work to do, and there's more understanding that needs to be a responsiveness built into the council system. And so it's always, you know, always a line of work that needs to be done, and the mission will be ongoing.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. Addressing you, Chris, when we're talking about accessibility, do you see your lobbying for more accessible everything also aligns with, say, making places safe for families, children, older people, etc.?
Absolutely, because there is the concept of, say, for example, universal design in terms of buildings, making sure that everyone can access the building safely, and that includes everybody in this room. But that has particular benefits for disabled people, as well as families with young children who may be using children's stroller, adults pushing child's stroller, for example, or whatever. So accessible design has universal design, which I would really encourage councillors to get across, and particularly those involved in infrastructure and other issues. That is really quite important. But we are quite pleased, though, we're quite pleased last year to hear that the council had adopted the universal street sign. That's one example.
Yes, and it enables all people to access.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chris. Thank you for your submission.
Thank you, councillor.
Our next submitter is Christine Keller.
What a hard pick to follow. This one is on. Good morning, good afternoon. It's kia ora, and thank you for having me here. And my name is Christine Keller, and I run Dunedin Sloom Room, which is a little social enterprise. But my reason I wanted to put some ideas at you is the thought of how we can get some more people out of cars and into public transport. And I just wanted to share some experiences I have from my home country in Germany, because I have been living here for 14 years now, and I understand that people here are used to own cars. And the feeling is, for me as a car owner, you get into your car, you feel like I'm not paying anything because you're not paying $3 every time you go somewhere. I go on a bus, I have to pay money. And I go on the next bus, and I even have to pay again. And so, a couple of thoughts. We are a university city, and in the city where I studied, when you became a student, you paid additional to your student fee about $135 per semester, and you got a semester ticket for public transport. So everything that was public transport for the half year, and actually one semester ticket is for 7 months, so they overlap. So if you're studying the whole year, you have the whole year free ticket. And I'm not saying that the amount is appropriate, this is maybe changing anyway, but I mean, if you would think that every student would be charged $4 or $5 a week additional to the study fees, it's not a big amount in what they pay for their studies, but you have 20,000 university students, I don't know how many other students, and that is something that could give you, it could be a win-win on many levels, because you could get the critical mass. Students don't desperately need a car, which is out of their budget in a way anyway. So if they don't need to pay every time they go on the bus, they get on the bus, then they, then like for example, $50 per semester would give you, with 20,000 students, $2 million you can calculate with without even thinking about who's getting on or not. And a problem that I heard in Germany was that the people who were in other trainings, but not at university, they became students. Like in Germany, we don't pay our high, enormous student fees, but they were becoming students without ever going to the university because they wanted that ticket. So if something like this could be considered in any way, I would also expand and think which other groups of people maybe would be interested or could benefit from something like that. So other people who are in training, tertiary or secondary, I don't know even the system for secondary at the moment. You could think about beneficiaries. So people who, like, actually I was in a well-paid job when I came to New Zealand and I was made redundant. So I have the doubtful experience or beautiful experience to be on a benefit for, have been on a benefit for 3 years, and it's not a nice experience. But if there was something that $2 or $3 of your weekly allowance are taken into a ticket like that, and you would have, as a community card holder, so you would have off-peak access to public transport without having to all the time pay the extra money, that would be really beneficial. And the other thing is this, that I don't know, this is your system and this is how it's done in New Zealand, but the tendering of the bus companies for the individual lines brings a competition that gets the bus drivers' wages down. And I think that we should, like, I would encourage you, but I think that the whole community should see public transport as something that everybody needs, and it's not something that we should compete to have it as cheap as possible. Like Luxembourg, for example, as a little mini state, has made public transport free for everybody. So we could even think, are there other ways that people who live in Dunedin could buy themselves into a scheme? Like if I pay, maybe I don't, if I earn money over a community card level, maybe I could pay $300 or $400 a year, like, or we don't even have weekly or monthly or even daily passes. And I really miss that. I was in Sydney last week. You have the card like the Go card, but it will cap it at, and Sydney is a huge city, it caps it at $15.80. On the weekend, it caps your price. On a Sunday, it caps the fee for a day for $2.70. So I went from Wollongong to Sydney, to the ferry, and everything for $2.70. And for that, I can even go from my home to the Octagon, but I cannot go from the Octagon to Port Chalmers or something. And I think that doesn't add up. So I just wanted to put, I don't know if this is the thing or if it has to go to regional council, but I saw this as a great opportunity to throw those ideas at you. Thank you.
You happy to take questions?
Yeah.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you for that submission. I guess the first thing that I look at is that I actually campaigned on this at the last mayoral election, and the fact, and exactly for the same premises that you're talking about. One of the factors I saw, and I'd like your thoughts on, do you think that would also disperse our students around the community a lot more if they had a bus pass that they basically paid for at the beginning, so they would also take less stress off our student rentals?
Maybe. I mean, we have really problems with room to live and stuff. But if the students don't need a car to live in other areas, I think it could be a starting point to have this critical mass that you could even improve your bus service into regions in the city that maybe are more difficult to reach. And I mean, it is a system where everybody is forced to pay for something that I'm sure there will be some people that say, oh, but I don't use it. But I think this is really something as important that I think that should be imposed on people. And like, for example, as a ratepayer or so, I would not mind to be charged extra for free or very low public transport. So I think the students would benefit, and they would be definitely more free to go anywhere. And I mean, maybe less drink driving, because you can just take the bus home or something like that.
Councillor Laufiso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for your submission and for your presentation. I am, my bias is that I have been a student, and I'm also, when I was at the University of Otago a long time ago, I was a domestic student, so having grown up here in the city, there is a tension between, if you like, domestic students and international and students from outside the city, in that students from outside the city largely benefit greatly as compared to young people who grow up in the city and don't necessarily go to university. So I'm myself loath to be part of what I perceive to be a further penalty of young people, given that in our day, pre-1999, politicians and everybody else who went to university didn't have student fees. So from a big picture perspective, I don't think that we should be imposing any further things on our young people, and I wouldn't really be supporting this. And also, I'm aware of young people who live in the North End, but if they participate in sports, that one of the main stadiums is the Edgar Stadium, which is out south, and therefore a car is required because the bus service is not reliable enough to be able to get them to sports pitches in a timely fashion. So I don't know, what would your response be to my objection?
I think that, thank you very much. I think that the way I see it, I'm just sharing my background, and I think that we can't, like, I would not even wonder how to think it big. No way is to think too big. So if you can include as many people, I definitely don't want to exclude people that are at the university, but that was one example of a very good way to get a little bit of fee. Like, if you get $1 a week from the young people, but therefore they can go anywhere, I'm sure that everybody will save over the year. If you pay $100 a year, nobody will not use that. If they don't need to spend that extra, they will go around on the weekend, let's go to the movies or whatever. They will save money, I'm sure. And it's just this, like, I would like to include, I would love a pass like that. I would like to include as many people as possible, so that I said in when I was a student, it was the students that did it. As I said, we have lots of people in Germany who really become like 20% almost that sign up to be a student, who never ever intend to even go to one lecture. So it's just, if there is a way that we can sign, like, that we can sign more people up to this, that would be absolutely fantastic. And you could say that it's for younger people, it's cheaper, until maybe the moment you earn more than you get, then you would be, how you say that, eligible to the community services card. If you earn more than 30,000, you can afford more. But so I would like to include as many people as possible, but just this, the problem is, if you say you can opt out, is that then you don't get the critical mass. And of course the idea is that you get somehow a base that fixes the cost, that you get more people on it in the first place, and get more buses to the Edgar Centre.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks very much for your submission, and it's certainly, I've seen models like this working around. I just asked Mr. Drew, the head of infrastructure, when the public consultation on public transport's coming, and it's not our council that's doing it, it's the ORC that does it, but we are more and more actively involved, and it's coming, I believe, next year. And I think that that'd be a great venue for you to come back and give that presentation again, because that's the venue in which we might be talking about mechanisms of funding. In the context of everything else that we have to meet when we do that, you touched on the contract requirements that's illegal, that's a national law, so that has to change before we can get rid of that
May I?
issue. But do you want people to be requesting changes in some of these laws to get rid of some of these activities?
Yes, thank you. Actually, just when I was waiting or when I was looking for a car park on the national radio, I heard this interview where they said that the failure of the bus lines in Wellington had to do with the bus services having to retender. And they said that they were expecting from the city council to maybe take an initiative and say, we want that, we acknowledge that the tender process is actually counterproductive. And so, I mean, I'm doing a very personal and very informal presentation here, and I don't know, like Chris who talked before, he knew all the right terminology. I don't know all those hurdles you have to undergo, but I think that with the whole thing that we have about the climate change and the state of the earth reports and stuff, I think that time is too short to just go on with little tweaks. I think that the system needs to be rethought, and we talk about Dunedin being this great city. Maybe be bold. That's just my word.
Which would mean that we actually have to actively pressure central government for that change because we can't do it without it. But you would say, go ahead, do it.
Go.
Put the pressure on.
Yeah.
Cool.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I can remember actually getting a 3-month pass many years ago to use the buses, and it was very handy because you just have it for a number of times and you don't have to worry about topping up. The regional council may be a good place. They do have public forum, and that would be good. I was just wondering about your ideas about also maybe looking at Dunedin having a partnership model with the tertiary institutions. You know, would they subsidise some of the fares for students as part of their commitment to climate change? I don't know.
Yes.
It's just putting it out there,
Yeah,
really.
so I don't really know the in and outs. I know that when I Googled it a little bit to find out what was happening in Germany, there was a process in which the tertiary education institutions had to apply to be part of that scheme. So it could be that that there is a way to negotiate that. I mean, maybe that would be great because you have less parking and whatever. Like, if 20,000 people don't need to rely on it, maybe 10,000 will still use the car, but maybe a quarter will not, and that will definitely take some pressure away. Like, I think every car helps, but every car that's not on the road, but it's just a way to start to maybe potentially start an avalanche, because public transport, in my view, is not really good enough yet, but we have all these almost empty buses when I go. So it is a thing of, even if the people are in there, make it free for everybody under 25 for a year and see what happens, you know, like, I mean, it does not link to exactly what I said, but just this thing of having a big group of people coming on with a relative low threshold. My student in the loom room said it cost her $6 or so to come from her class to Northeast Valley one way. That is too much. Yeah, I wouldn't pay that. Thank you.
That, I think, brings us to the end of the questions. So thank you, Christine.
Thank you very much for hearing me. Thank you.
Our next submitters are Mountain Bike Otago, and I think we have Glenn Howell and Christy Booth. Welcome to the table, and if you are speaking, just make sure your microphone is on, and it's just the button at the bottom.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Glenn Howell from Mountain Biking Otago. I'm a long-term committee member of about 20 years and a past president removed, and Christy, my colleague here, who is the current club president. I guess we're assuming that people have probably read the submission put through by Hamish. We're a bit of a step into the breach moment here. Obviously, as a club, our objectives and goals have been from a recreational and sporting point of view to provide events and facilities for the community for mountain biking, whether it be at a competitive level or a recreational level, and from a junior age moving through to an elite sort of a character. We host some fairly significant events in this city, things like the South Island Secondary Schools, which I think this year we're looking to have something like about 900 participants in, bringing a significant number of bed numbers into the city and money into the community, based off the backs of our efforts. I guess key bit for us is obviously being able to work with DCC and make sure that we stay aligned with your strategic plans and goals, and to provide good community outcomes so that people can get out and enjoy the city that we have and the recreational trails or just the great features that we have around the city. Whether it be we're not just advocating for mountain biking here, we would do this for walking groups or whoever else gets involved with those facilities we create. And obviously we're trying to encourage people out there, in the world we've got into now where obesity rates are high, and exercise and activity is a great thing if you can get young people involved. And older people, that's kind of where we're heading. We obviously want to partner with others to promote those outdoor recreation experiences. There's certainly a few community groups around here that we do that with. We would like to thank DCC actually in the last couple of years for their contributions to us, for the maintenance grants that we receive, and the recent money we received for a toilet block at Signal Hill that's progressing its way through to try and get that to happen. From a submission point of view, we've kind of got 6 items on the table here that we were looking at. Obviously, the first one's just to request a continuance of the support from DCC for developing our facilities, particularly at the Signal Hill Recreation Reserve. This thing's turned into a bit of a boon for us. It's it gets a phenomenal amount of users. It's 1,500 odd users per week. We have track counters out there seeing who's coming and going, and not just riders. You'll find walkers in the morning, runners in the morning, people with dogs in the evening. Just any general time of day, there'll be people on that hill using the tracks and trails that we've built, which I guess kind of started about 11 years ago to do that. We're currently at the stage where we're just finishing off the car park. It's open, but still needs a bit of a clean up. It's got some jumps and tracks around the edge of kids park around the edge of that, to try and encourage those younger users in. Probably an area we haven't quite been all that strong at, but certainly aiming towards, with the intent of getting through to getting a toilet installed, and some facilities for ourselves to be able to, I guess, provide a maintenance service on that hill, and in other parts around the town. One of the items that we have asked for is that a toilet be investigated at the top of Signal Hill. We seem to be, aside from creating our own monster by getting people in on that hill, also you've got a tourism number that's starting to come up as well, and that seems to be creating some quite big percentages of people at that top of the hill with no real facilities up there for the benefit of the people that get up there. Especially around that monument, you can find a lot of people up there, and your next stop's really heading down to the gardens. We ask, for some as much assistance as we can get, obviously, for developing new tracks on Signal Hill Reserve. It's on a growth. It's just continually going up. We have some issues. We created the Big Easy track up, realising that we actually now need to create a trail down, because at the moment we have a conflict of users, those heading up colliding with those heading down, but the means of exiting down the hill, if you don't take that avenue, is normally reasonably technically difficult for most people. So we need to, that's probably our core goal on that hill, is to try and get that in place, and tracking along. So and looking for some assistance on that if we can get that. We also and this is quite a big one, this has been going on for a while, an iconic track. Dunedin's kind of missing that iconic track, you know, something that is a destination track that people would go to, a bit like the rail trail. Yeah, yeah, exactly right. You know, obviously the two options is the peninsula heading out around the Arm or up over the Three Peaks Trail. For us, we've probably already done a fair bit of work mapping out a path up around the top of the city. We've got a wee slideshow we talk through on this one. Yeah, with the intent of actually, effectively the intent was to be able to go from the bullpen at Swampy over at Waddy Flat up over the Three Peaks and back round and exit back down into Logan Park. There's been some work done with landowners and the like to get access through those areas. Signal Hill's obviously there, so the climb up one end of it's actually effectively done. It's just working our way through what assistance can be done to, or what groups we can work with to come up with a trail like this, because we kind of feel this is probably a cohesive one that could be done with other user groups, walking groups, and it would be a destination call. Really, you know, that's a tourism boom, something like that. That's the sort of thing people would come to the city to do, whether it be in part or in full. I think it maps out at about 50 k's around the top. I think by the time you get to the end of that. So yeah, I think Christy's just brought the map up, which we have proposed, which is the red line running up around the top of the city. And effectively this one actually links the multiple parks around the city as well. We have, because there's 4 parks, well, 5, Warri Flat, Wackery Creek, Forest of Bethunes, you got Nichols Creek, and of course Signal Hill. So, and the red line was effectively the intent behind that was to be able to create a trail around the top of the hills that could then be access linked into all the other mountain bike come recreational parks around the city, but in the meantime, so people don't have to do the thing in its entirety. And of course, the Otago Peninsula Challenge, which again is a great avenue to create a trail around. Item 5 that we've sort of approached, well, that's to enhance and link existing tracks around Dunedin, and it's quite an interesting one. We have a lot of track and trail around the city. Some of it's fallen into disrepair, which is still a great trail. I was just reading this morning on the Fraser's Gully track, great to get those things up and going, but probably looking at those to where they can actually link to other trails or actually be created out as sort of more usable. Nichols Falls was a classic. It's one that's just fallen into disrepair. It's an iconic historic trail, and and I guess as a club, that's some of those things we sort of do go a wee bit sideways off our own core business and actually try and help out in some of those things to get them up and going. But it would be one of those ones that would be good to get an assist on or have some sort of process in place to actually deal with some of those. And we were looking at the Parks and Recreation budget, going, can we get this maybe lifted to help them out? Because I think sometimes we kind of see a few issues there where maybe we don't quite get things off the ground with those guys. Perception probably was that they're struggling to meet budget and actually get things done, but that may have been a bit of a we might have got a bit sideways on that one. So so that's pretty much us, other than the slideshow. If you want to run back through that and ask any questions on that, or if you just want to run that through.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, and thank you for the great work you do. I just want to check, when you develop tracks to a design level to take the wear and tear of all weathers, I presume. So when you talk about tracks going into disrepair, is that because they're no longer being used or because they haven't been designed in the first place correctly? And I'm not getting at you because I want to take this to a different point.
No.
So, but we're not talking about our tracks.
No. It's a good call. Yes, no. I think you're right. I think tracks initially were built probably around an easy line that could be followed. Normally puts them in a difficult piece of terrain. So and probably arguably have always been done by walkers or trampers. So for them to build down a full line or where you just have to climb up it and you might have to work your way through a muddy bog, you're not really too worried about it. But of course the problem with that is in the sustainability of that trail. Once you get water erosion into it, there's no surface layer on it, and the gradient's quite steep. It'll take them out pretty quickly. And of course, I think you get that element where you actually get lots of little splinter groups that do little bits and pieces, and then they sort of come of age and go, I've had enough of this, and walk away. And those trails, those little groups who had a vested interest in looking after that tend to unintentionally abandon them, and they haven't got a good surface structure in place, or not something that's really or easy for someone else to pick up on. And
So comparing that to the types of tracks that your group develops, which are not only for cyclists but for walkers generally?
so there's a split in that, obviously. So we build multiple levels of trails. Obviously, things like the Big Easy at Signal Hill or Walkery Creek was built as an easy user trail for multi-user groups. Anyone could use it. Walkers, runners, cyclists can use it. Then you take it up to those levels where we've built the competitive trails and the downhill trails. Now those ones there obviously have a presented degree of difficulty in maintenance because they are fault lines or they do come down gradients and you can't easily surface them. But the upside of those is they're actually reasonably easily surfaced because they are connected off a good, well-maintained, low-grade trail. So the Big Easy feeds into all the feeder trails. Some are sort of mid-grade that it doesn't take much to go into the scrub cutter or something like that, take the foliage back. Other ones are fall lines that over time you're going to have to retire them or go around the edge of them. But suit the need for that particular level of recreation or pursuit.
Okay. And what difference does something like, and I understand there's quite a few of your members, e-bikes have an effect on that?
Right, so e-bikes it's an interesting topic of conversation this one because we haven't really quite addressed this. We know there's going to be an effect. I think if we look at the trails that we build, again, I'll go back to the Big Easy because it's a very good one to look at. It will tolerate e-bikes very well. It was well constructed. It's a metre and a bit wide, and it's built on 3 inches of road millings and gravel. So it will tolerate the use of e-bikes, and even the descent. There's no more negative effect on the descent with an e-bike than there is with a normal mountain bike. On the climbs, yes, some people may elect to go up trails that they wouldn't have necessarily been able to get up. I think the risk with e-bikes is probably maybe to trails that they shouldn't be on.
Yep.
Mount Cargill would be a classic where someone might choose to go up that because now they can. So I don't, I'm not advocating that obviously.
Yeah, okay. And so the trail that you want to develop here, the Three Peaks Trail,
Yep.
you'll be developing it at that higher level or not, yeah.
But it should be,
Yeah.
it should still be able to be ridden by an e-bike.
Yeah.
That the trail, when you're riding an e-bike, you're actually still only riding at the ability that you can ride at. So for me, it might be out of my range, but it would be within Glenn's range to ride that, but it will take whatever type of bike we put on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think the key thing with those sorts of trails too, and it's a little bit like the Big Easy, it's the maintenance on them to ensure that you've got a risk element here where you've got different parties on the trail. You've got something that can, like a lime scooter, obviously can move fast and a footpath, so can a mountain bike on a trail. It's making sure the maintenance is at a level where the foliage and blind corners are always maintained, so that people, it's really it's wide enough that you can get two things happening in two different directions. And it's also got good visual range on all of it, and it's sustainable, especially getting up to a terrain like that where it's high and you don't really want to go back and be revisiting it every few years. So it's a commitment to build something like that. It's a big commitment, but it's well doable, and certainly I would suggest that for what we've done at Signal Hill, it's been an exceptional tester of how to build a trail that's, I think Christy and her husband go up every now and then on the weekends with a scrub cutter or a hedge trimmer and give the bushes a bit of a whack, but that's really about all that's needed. We haven't had to put any gravel on that. We finished that 4 years ago. Yeah, it's got some little patch areas that they maintain, but it's very, very minimal. So,
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Just trying to get a clearer picture. Essentially, the only dollars I can see you're really looking for is one for an investment in a toilet at the top of Signal Hill, and secondly, to increase around the track maintenance budget.
that's probably a reasonable statement. I guess we're always looking for whatever we can get. We're a fairly resourceful group, so we seem to be able to come up with a fair bit ourselves anyway. Nothing makes money like money, but there's just some things that sometimes for us are a little bit too far beyond over the line for us to be able to do as a volunteer group, be able to draw on trusts or grants to get that sort of funding to be able to do some of those things. You know, obviously something like a toilet at the top of Signal Hill would be a significant commitment. I appreciate it's probably above a reservoir line. It's probably above anything else.
But that's also for the benefit for a wider grouping, not
Yeah.
just
by all means, yes.
the
Yeah,
cycles. Okay, so that's what I'm sort of trying to get an indication. So it's a city asset.
Yeah, and if you look at everything that Mountain Biking Otago does, we are providing city assets. We don't do anything that is just for the club. It is for the wider community to enjoy.
Yeah. And the track matters. The part that I'm really interested about is mountain bike tourism has really taken off around the country. Rotorua seems to be investing quite a lot and really promoting themselves, but yet our quality of tracks, from what I understand, are easily comparable, if not better than Rotorua.
We would be up there with Rotorua. I think Rotorua is an interesting one, and I guess this is, I was kind of, didn't know whether I could broach into this one or not, but Rotorua has actually managed to create a very strong symbiotic relationship between the mountain bike clubs. They've actually probably got about 4 entities going on here. You've got the clubs, you've got the trail developers, which there's actually paid professional trail developers in that city or town, and you've got, I think, the local iwis on board and the council. So they're all very heavily invested in what's going on in this. I think we do well with you guys, but I don't necessarily sometimes think we quite have that complete investment into what we're doing which is we're very appreciative of what goes on, but sometimes the relationship can be a wee bit difficult. I think especially Parks and Recs has obviously had its issues over the last wee while with a bit of a transient staff and actually trying to get some continuity back working with you guys. If I kind of look back what we did, I've been doing this for 20 something odd years. The original Parks and Recs department was very easy to work with. It was a little bit, they took a little bit of getting traction to get going, but once they realised what we were about and what we were able to do, very on board with us. And then of course you have this rollover, you just start getting traction with the group and that arena, and then it kind of morphs on, so it makes it a little bit difficult.
Yeah.
It doesn't roadblock us, but it just impedes us a little bit more than maybe it once used to. Appreciating there's other issues hiding out there, health and safety, and as council's obviously, that's a big one. It's something we're obviously quite hot on.
The other side of that is, for example, there's the South Island secondary schools. How many participants?
So we've held the South Island secondary schools for 6 years. This will be our 6th year. This year we're not hosting South Islands, we're actually hosting the national champs for the school. So it's estimated that we'll have about 900 entries over the 3 days. And I think they worked that out, that's an economic benefit to the city between 1 and 1.2 million. Because it's school holidays, they're here for the week. It's not just the kids travelling with the school, because it is the holidays, the schools don't take that commitment, they're coming with their families. So it's a really big week for us. We've been part of setting that event up. When we first did that event ran at a loss to the club of over 3,500, whereas we are now projecting an income off that of about 25,000 profit. So for us to be able to then put that back into the tracks for the city, because that's what we do with all of our income, it goes back into something. So the kids are showing that there is huge growth in the sport when we're producing this at a kids level event. For the first time ever, we're going to be capping the events because we just can't cater for numbers higher than what we can do. So that's a transport logistics, especially for downhill, where we have to drive the riders to the top.
Perfect, that's a great story, thank you.
I think something Christy maybe missed on that too, with those numbers, because they are actually all from out of the community, the credibility that goes away with them for what we have as an asset in Dunedin is huge. It gets talked about, it goes up and down the country.
Councillor Elder.
Just a couple of questions, and I've got a blank. It's terrible. What was my question? I'll have to look. Yes, the Three Peaks track. That's what my question was. Is that going to be a shared track, like for runners and walkers?
Yes.
And
Most definitely, yeah. No horses, maybe.
so if I wanted to do a circuit, say or not quite a circuit, if I wanted to walk from Flagstaff, say do a half-day walk, I could go from Flagstaff and go right the way down to Signal Hill.
That would be the intent, yes.
Okay, and if I wanted to drop down to Nichols Creek, I could fall from that.
You can come back down to...
No, I don't fall from it, but come down from that track. So I could do little links to different places, like even Sullivan's Dam, maybe.
Yeah, well, Sullivan's Dam would be, I think, would just about be one of the crossover points at the top. I think we had, that's obviously an area that's a little bit interesting up there, being the being that rainforest and how you manage your way around that. But I think the link down would bring you back down to Sullivan's.
Come down the track or something.
Yeah.
So potentially there would be like at least 8 different places you could come down in different tracks to visit different places and have a different experience. You could do half day, you could do quarter of a day, you could do a whole day, either walking, biking, or running if you want. That makes it a bigger picture than just the track itself, but the linkages to it. Are there any other linkages that I've kind of missed out on?
No, I think you're probably right. I think that you've picked them up. It would drop you into Bethune's Gully or down Nichols, and it would exit past Sullivan's Dam, at least within reasonably close proximity to it. So you'd be able to make your way to that. And effectively, it is traversing sort of underneath Mount Cargill as well. So you've got
you could pop up the hill.
You could pop up the hill,
so to speak,
if you chose to do so. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And with entry exit points, every exit point's an entry point as well. So it's,
So it'll be world class walking, biking, and running track that you could do so many visits off it. It would be amazing. And a huge asset, do you think, for tourism?
Well and truly, yeah. And if you go back to the likes of Nichols, where we were talking, we've got the mountain bike track going up, and we've talked about the original Nichols Trail on the other side of the creek, which has sort of gone into a state of disrepair. That's an ideal situation to actually tidy that one up as well, to give two different user groups 2 different options to be able, and particularly to get down into that waterfall, because that's spectacular in the middle there. And one of those hidden treasures of Dunedin, I don't think a lot of people kind of know to get to.
And glowworms.
And the glowworms. Yep.
Now, the other thing is, you mentioned about the Big Easy, and I use the Big Easy for walking. I love it because it takes you right to the top of Signal Hill. At how many degrees?
It's a 3% gradient, and it's about 6 kilometres long.
Yes, so it's 3% gradient, so all of you can walk it. And it takes you to the top of Signal Hill, but it's getting really busy. So if you were to be given any money, I'm just saying possibility, would the downhill Big Easy be one of your top priorities?
So the Big Easy down is a top priority for us now, and we are ready to move on that, and we're not asking you for any money to help us with that. We would never say no if it came our way, but we can do this on our own. We just need you guys to say yes, go ahead and build it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think the advantage, if there was something that came our way, would be that we can, at the moment, we're working as a volunteer group. We probably get ourselves reasonably well split. You've actually got a group working on Nichols at the moment, trying to progress that. And you've also, now we're looking to divest ourselves across into, so it becomes weekend work or evening work, and then it's just working out at what point in time, we could progress this reasonably, at a reasonable rate, if you could put a paid contractor into the task. So that's things we would be interested to look at. But as Christy said, we can progress this on our own. It's just where the finishes ends up here, over here, on a timeline. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the hard.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Christy. Seems we have dried up the questions. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome Dave Sharp, please. Welcome, Dave.
Welcome, tēnā koutou, and good afternoon, councillors and staff. Thank you for this time. So I'm chair of the Landscape Connection Trust, following on from trying to follow the very large footprints left by Ginty. Our focus, for those of you who may not be aware of us, is working through communities to develop healthy and resilient landscapes in the area surrounding the Olokanui Eco Sanctuary. And our patch, if you like, extends from the north of North East Valley up to Kalatani. And the good news is, I guess, that I'm not here to ask for anything. Not this year anyway. You're probably aware also that the Landscape Connection Trust is an integral group of the Predator-Free Dunedin project. And essentially I'm here today to put on the record the Trust's appreciation, if you like, of Council's support for the Predator-Free Dunedin initiative. And probably in particular, of course the funding is critical. And the funding actually from Council, you may be aware, was critical to actually getting Predator-Free Dunedin established, and the funding line from Predator-Free 2050. So that was essential, and LCT is most appreciative of that. But in addition, I think we would like to express both our support and our appreciation of the fact that the DCC has picked up the leadership in the urban linkage program, which is a vital link, well, the obvious link, between the peninsula and the Trust area of operation. It's a challenging, it's probably in a way, in one sense, the most challenging of all, partly because it's a new kid off the block in terms of the work that's previously been done by the Otago Peninsula Biodiversity Group and the Trust itself. But as I said, we believe that the Council can and will play a very substantial role in making Predator-Free Dunedin a success. In addition, of course, to our predator-free work, we have a number of projects operating across our landscape. We have a coastal forest project, coastal restoration forest, and we also have a significant seabird habitat protection project. And we've also just established our Source to Sea program, which is essentially at this stage working with schools within their own catchments. I think currently we have something like 200 community-based volunteers actually on the ground supporting our projects. And really, that's probably all I have to say in terms of my submission. But I say, it was important to us that we do formally put on the record the appreciation for Council's support. And if we actually think of Dunedin as, you know, the wildlife capital of New Zealand, I think the Predator-Free Dunedin project is absolutely essential. So thank you.
Happy to take questions?
Yes, more than happy.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp, and it's really nice to get a submission that is so positive and acknowledges work done. I mean, someone that's has observed the impact of the biodiversity group's work over a large number of years, I wondered if you could comment on something, a question I have for you, because you talked about the importance of that urban linkage. Would it be true to say that mopping up is often the word used, the possums coming back into areas that are previously pretty clear? In other words, the continued work is absolutely vital.
Without a doubt. You're probably all aware of the very significant investment that Osprey have put into this area through their possum control. And LCT we have a partnership with Osprey that is designed exactly to do that, to actually ensure that we have the systems and technology in place that will prevent, if you like, the establishment of those possum numbers. Having said that, I acknowledge that that's a challenge. And to be honest, for us, the biggest challenge of all is, if you like, our western boundary. Again, in an area where Osprey have done considerable amount of work and removed well over 10,000 possums. it's probably fair to say that the technology doesn't even quite exist at this point, but it's still in development that will allow us to protect that boundary. But we are, and our predator-free program has exactly those systems in place and that focus in place, that when Osprey go, that our community and our staff have the capacity to maintain those numbers.
And I had a second question, and that was about the importance of taking the community with you. I've watched that journey as well. Do you have any comments on that in the wider sense of your work?
LCT has always been, and it's written into our values, a community-driven program. And we actually have just employed, with the funding from Predator 2050, we now have employed a full-time community coordinator, if you like, whose focus is making sure that the community is on board. The reality is when you move into urban areas, that becomes a bit more challenging, simply because you have perhaps a more diverse range of opinions around predator control. But essentially, all our work is fundamentally community driven. Having said that, I think if we are to achieve the objectives of 2050 and of predator-free Dunedin, we have to be more than just a nice community-driven program. We need to have a level of expertise and professionalism that is based around eradication rather than just an effective community program. So for us, those two things go hand in hand. It's really essential that the community is on board, but at the same time, we need to have the professional skills, if you like, and expertise that go beyond that.
Thank you again for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora, Dave. Climate change occupies a lot of the headlines, but obviously we're also in a biodiversity crisis, or as New York Magazine calls it, humans about to kill off 1 million species in act of murder-suicide. I'm just interested in and thank you for the work that you and your group do in trying to reverse that. I'm interested in the urban linkage project and whether, and what is it, and when you're expecting it to go live, if that's something that you can speak to.
I can speak up to a limited point.
That's fine.
So clearly, if you actually just look at, if we actually look at the map that's behind me or in front of me now, you'll see clearly there's the peninsula, and we have the Otago biodiversity group, a peninsula biodiversity group that for many years now has been eradicating possums on the peninsula and doing a very good job, to which they have now added, obviously, mustelids as part of 2050. Our part of the world, if you like, perhaps in simple terms, if you look at Signal Hill, and then that big area of the landscape to the east of the motorway up beyond Waitati. But that leaves, of course, that really critical bit in the middle, Dunedin City. When you actually think of, funnily enough, removing predators, let's think of rats in the first place. From an urban area, that's a difficult task. Coupled to which, as I say, you've also got probably a more diverse range of opinions about predator control. So essentially, the question before was about community-driven. If we actually look at Dunedin City and the work that we are currently doing around Port Chalmers and some of the smaller urban areas, such as Purakanui, it essentially is entirely community-driven. So, if you like, it's like a neighbourhood by neighbourhood exercise. I actually can't give you much more information, Aaron, about how that actually looks at this stage. I think it is, to say, the late cab off the rank in terms of predator-free Dunedin, but an absolutely critical bit.
That's fine. So that, and obviously it's going to look different in different neighbourhoods. That's sort of how these things work. But that's happening now, is it?
Well, that's right. And I think, for example, in North East Valley, there's active predator control happening. And so essentially it is about building those, even down at a below suburb, but at a neighbourhood level. I know in Port Chalmers, for example, we do have an active community participation that are managing predator control throughout Port.
Sounds like we've run out of questions.
That's good.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, councillors.
Our next submitter is Craig Waterhouse. Welcome, Craig. Floor's yours.
Hi, I'm Craig Waterhouse from the South Dunedin Business Association. Thank you for allowing me to come to present to the annual plan. As you would have seen from my submission, it's a little bit light on content because I managed to submit it without the attached document. So I think it might have saved you a bit of pre-reading and made your afternoon a little lighter on the last day. So it will be limited to the verbal version, sorry. My main purpose of the submission is to support the continued and timely development of the South Dunedin Community Complex and Library. South Dunedin Community and Business Association are really thrilled with the steps taken by the council to develop this complex this year. The steps taken as far regarding the site. It's a great site, it's accessible, it's a great size, great potential for future expansion. It apparently is sturdy and has great car parking. I gather there's still an issue with a few of the current leases, but I'm sure the DCC team that are dealing with this will be fair in order to expedite the development of the site in due time. We are a little concerned and have had comments made from some of the people in the community about the limited amount of budget that's left over to develop the rest of the site. There's been great what should we call it, ideas on what should go into that site, which is great, but where's the money coming from? How much is going to be spent this year? How much is going to be spent next year? Where's the timeline? Where's the communication of the development progression timeline? I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm in the community because of the investment DCC have put into it so far. Especially with the place-based funding and a new community development facilitator in the community. But that enthusiasm in the community is going to be lost and apathy is going to come back and resignation that DCC are not doing anything for South Dunedin again if the progression doesn't carry on. You need to have the information coming out. We need to see what ideas are the plans and layouts, when those things are going to be happen. Otherwise, you're going to lose community enthusiasm in there. Okay. So we're not asking for more money, apart from more money that needs to be going into the development. I think if you look back into the DCC meeting minutes back in 2008, there was about $11 million going to be going into that development. We need to get back to that figure now. Because it's a great vision you got for it, but the money that's there now I don't think will be enough to pay for that. So I would implore you to keep the community consultation going, please, so the community knows when things are to be expected. It's taken 38 years to get to here. Let's please get the time period a little shorter for when we're going to get this completed. A few other small things. South Dunedin, actually, something that you guys have done that's really great is up the top end of Great King Street near the Captain Cook Hotel, that little pocket park. Absolutely great. Great design. I go past there every Tuesday lunchtime and it's been well used most days, unless it's raining. I think it's an absolutely great idea. And there was some talk of having pocket parks up George Street, the development. How about the Lawn Street area in South Dunedin? Okay. There's an artist recently who's won a prize and she's now part of that prize is painting the public toilets in the Lawn Street area, which is going to brighten it up. They're also looking at doing part of the side of that building. How about some development of the pocket park? You want to trial it somewhere? There's an ideal site to trial it on. Okay, suggestion there. to add into things. The other one was playgrounds, playground development. In South Dunedin, an ideal place for development of a playground. I think some money has been spent recently on Navy Park, which looks looking great. Bathgate Park playground. Anybody been past there recently? Okay, okay, 2 of you have. Anybody else know, apart from you two, anybody else know what items are on that playground area for children to play on? A swing and a seesaw. Really, really good evidence to show that good quality playgrounds are hugely more beneficial when placed in low-income housing areas. There's way better benefits for the community if those quality playgrounds, like a combination, maybe a combination of a pocket park and playground together. I'm sure you guys could do better than a swing and a seesaw, okay? And it's well out of the weather. There's a good tall building beside it. It's southerlies blow through there, and there's shelter on the other side. It's well sheltered from the weather. It gets the afternoon sun. It'll be well used. Yep. That's about it. Questions?
Questions, councillors? Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks for the presentation, Craig, and it kind of follows up from your presentation in public forum. For the purposes of funding, basically, you're saying that now that we've bought the right property on Commercial Street, we need to now make sure that we fit it out correctly. And obviously, you're saying that, obviously, I think anybody can do the math. There's not a lot left over after the purchase price. So you're asking, as we go forward, we consider, it'll probably now, as we head forward, it'll hard to fit it into this long-term plan, but in the next long-term plan, make sure that it's considered into that.
It would be good
factored in properly.
It would be good if the South Dunedin community know how much is planned to be spent in this year, this coming year, how much is in the following year, and what is aimed to be achieved in those time periods.
Excellent.
Just so we know the process is continuous, not just boom, it's just stopped again.
And the other one is, because Michelle Petty said yesterday too, Lawn Street and how we treat Lawn Street as an example of where the council's his eyes are and where its heart is, like you wanted to see something looking good there. Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for your very positive comments about the library, etc. Not just the library. I'm wondering about Lawn Street. We've had some other submissions earlier. Clearly, we're going to have a discussion about that, and something may come of that. But I'm wanting to ask if the Business Association sees that it might have a role or would consider a role in providing activities to help activate that area, music, whatever. Is that something that your association would consider?
What sort of activities are you?
Well, I'm thinking, a folk singer or some other sort of activities or something that might be, part of making spaces like that nice is not just nice urban design and vegetation but other activities that attract people and interest people. So, there might be a soapbox or, possibility, or a performer a couple of days a week or something like that, and that might be something that there could be a joint community and council effort on. Is that something that your association would consider?
Yes, we would consider that, and especially working with Michelle Reedy, the new community facilitator.
Who was here yesterday.
Yeah, she's very good at linking different groups together and finding out what groups can do what activities where. Yeah, the Lawn Street area was a major part of what was in the street festival. We had a large children's, we cordoned that area off and had a large children's play area there that was supervised and had lots of activities going on, clown doing activities and so on during that time.
Okay, that'd be good.
It was great. And it's also part of the busking festival. There's a stage area within that on the busking festival.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing I'm thinking of on a more regular basis, not just when events are happening too.
Yep, we'd look at that. Definitely.
Perfect year, actually. You could have a soapbox and a mayoral candidate, every day, and you'll have enough for a different one for the next 2 months.
I'm sure we could take that under advisement and we'd get lots of support soon.
Councillor Elder.
Thanks for your submission, Craig. And I just want to speak to Barkgate Park because it is in the middle of a lower socio-economic area. And I do go past it, and I note that in fact the setting is used all the time. There's always old people or friends sitting there having a chat pretty much every time you go past, unless it's wet. And so I really tautoko or support that park being a priority, because in fact, indeed, I'm trained as an occupational therapist in the past, and I see the value of physical activity, being outdoors and having meeting and social places in the community, and so I'm glad that you brought it forward.
Thank you.
Isn't that so? Sorry. Thank you, David.
Thank you for your submission.
Okay, thank you very much.
Our next submitter is Tim McMullen. Welcome, Tim.
Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi, thanks for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. I'm not here in any official capacity with any organization. I'm just Joe Ratepayer. So. Now, I do work heavily with Otago Access Radio, though, I will fess up, and also with Disc Golf Dunedin, who has a new course in Chingford Park. I hope you've had a chance to give it a throw. We're grateful for the council's support over the last few years for that, and we hope to have a few more courses in the offing and look forward to more support. It's a very popular all-age activity and almost all abilities up at Chingford. I've seen a wide range of folks using it. And it's been a really good outcome. Now, I also speak as a cyclist of many, many years, and not a lot in recent years because my bike and I have both been in better shape, but never mind. I still get out a fair bit, and I have put over the years tens of thousands of Ks on push bikes, and hopefully bear that in mind when I speak about some of the other things I want to say. The one thing I would say about cycling infrastructure, which has been improving drastically here in the last few years, I've noticed, is that the range of skill levels with cycling, as I'm sure you're aware, is everything from beginner all the way up to expert, and I know it's a hard thing to connect it all together, and I'm looking at these amazing rides that they're doing around here and how we feather that in together, because as a target destination, they were talking for tourism, is that you'll have plenty of people coming to town and getting off and getting on their bikes and going from point A to point B the entire way. And how we key those pieces of infrastructure together will be very important. I also wanted to say that the bus hub is a very impressive improvement. I'm very pleased with how that's gone, and look forward to increased ridership on the buses, I hope. And new roundabouts, work on drains, traffic layouts. There's a lot of good stuff going on, so I know you guys are the subject of a lot of criticism, and some of it may be fair, but there's a lot of good stuff that goes on too, and I just wanted to acknowledge that actually. I do notice a lot more congestion around town, which hopefully is just the result of the increased population, because Dunedin is such a great place to come to, so it can't really be a bad thing. There is some ambiguity in the road markings for cyclists and for pedestrians on the streets that I hope is being addressed as well. For pedestrians like up Rattray and so forth, and on Arthur, some of those crossings that are painted on, I'll see pedestrians kind of start into them as if they're actually legal crossings, and I know they're not. And I'm afraid that it's causing as much confusion as it's saving. It's drawing attention to the fact that there are pedestrians crossing around in schools and so forth, and that's good. But I'm not sure it's 100% the best way to have approached it. Also for cycling, I live up on City Rise, and often enough I'll ride down to town, but the 80-meter vertical climb getting back home is a bit of a challenge, so I go up the steps. And some of the steps are a little more bike-friendly to get up than others, but I know in places like Amsterdam, and we don't actually need to change things here, because in a lot of cases there's actually a gutter right there, but it's heavily overgrown. You'll see photos in my submission. It's heavily overgrown, but that gutter would be handy to run your bike up, and that allows traffic coming down to go the other direction. So just that sort of maintenance, keeping an eye on that. The other thing I'd like to speak to is George Street. I don't think it's any secret about the ostensible closing of George Street to traffic. I don't know how far along that actual plan is, but I did attend a meeting on it, and broadly, it's definitely got my support. I would love to see that happen. The one thing I really want to emphasize is the value perhaps of having a small couple of electric buses that would go from one end from Knox Church down to the Octagon and back, especially during tourist season. It would just allow people to hop on, hop off. It would want to be free, no charge for it, just allows people to cover that ground really quickly. And I think it'd be a good way to sell the idea to businesses is, here's something to get people to your store, because that's one of the problems people have. A lot of people want to park right in front of the store that they're going to, and this would deliver the customers, as it were. More parking garages may be another solution, and I'm sure that's for wiser heads than me to work out how and where, but and obviously in the off streets, Phil Oil and Great King. I would say in that vein that probably keeping Stewart Street open to uphill, downhill traffic is going to actually be important. I know we've closed the lower Octagon before, and I'm sure that was great, but in a bigger picture, keeping those channels open from Stewart connecting up the hill might actually be a valuable thing to do, but closing the actual cross street of George/Prince's. And I think the main thing about road safety stuff, I know we have a lot of problems with the death toll on the roads more broadly, and around towns maybe it's not so much of an issue, but getting all that congestion from A to B and decongesting, part of it you see like down at the railroad crossing, I noticed professional drivers, and I'm talking professional businesses, but also ambulances, I'm talking professional truck drivers, will pull forward to the crossing arm, and the train driver, if there's a Facebook page for bad parking and bad driving in Dunedin, I don't know if you participate, but the train driver routinely takes photos out the window of people that have pulled up past, and the guard is down on top of the vehicle. And maybe cross-hatching across there, like you have in front of St. John or something, to say, this is where you're not supposed to be. So sometimes it's just the little things, though, that solve the problems. And I guess the other thing as far as the busing goes is the idea of a free bus circuit around town, I think is a good one, although I think there will be a pretty endless battle over where it should be. And maybe the longer term goal is to actually try and find a way to subsidize busing so it's free entirely, and that might actually encourage more ridership at all hours. I know there's been an expense in it, it's something we can't just throw money at, but if the outcome is good, it could be worth doing. I'm glad to take any questions.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I wanted to start by saying thank you for taking the time to come in and make such a wide-ranging, considered submission. My question is how you sort of apologised at the start for being just a ratepayer. Well, you're not just a ratepayer, but how accessible was it to come here? We know this can sometimes be quite intimidating, but how did you find the process of making your submission and actually coming along today?
Overall, I'd have to say probably 8 or 9 out of 10, frankly. The submission process, the accessibility online is very good for doing submissions. And as far as coming here, I've pretty much given up on using George Street in anticipation of what I hope will be the closure of it. So I'm now using Phil Oil and Great King, and I know about the car parks pretty well because I'm downtown quite a bit. And I suppose my thought is it's quite obvious to everybody that it should be, where you can go and where you can't. But I guess some people don't get out as much, but I know where like the 12-hour parks are over by the pool house and stuff. So I pulled in there and anticipated and left myself enough time to come in. But yeah, sometimes during peak periods and peak activities, it's just going to be hard to get, down around town. And I have the advantage living in town. I'll just walk down if I need to. I'm quite happy doing that. But yeah, quite good. All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Our next submitter is Tanya Sherry Williams. Not here? All right. We will move to Karen Anderson. Yeah, it's all under control. The floor's yours.
Right, am I hearable?
You have, yep, you are, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Right, so council has my written submission, which includes the solutions/recommendations to consider in relation to the 2 issues that I have focused on. I just want to highlight a couple of points, and it should be well under 5 minutes. So in relation to the dog fee increases, I want to be very clear. It is not about objecting to fees. It's not about refusing to accept that they might possibly need to increase. It's about that by inspection, the scale of proposed fees only a few have increased, and almost all apply to the most compliant classes of dogs and owners who would consume the least resources. Now, the annual plan information document states fees have generally increased by 3%. I know that wasn't an absolute measure. But all the increases to the law-abiding, low resource-consuming dogs and owners have increased well above that amount, sir. Now, dog fee increases were considered by the Ombudsman, who issued a decision in 2000. It's a range of issues, but one of the things the Ombudsman considered was that in applying Section 37 of the Dog Control Act, which hasn't changed since then, he concluded council needed to have before it actual information when it decided the amount of fees to charge. There's nothing. Now, in relation to the official information request charges, the point that I want to highlight there is that this is also increased well above 3%. And the reduction of free time from 3 hours to just 1 hour is not disclosed. Now that, as my submission said on one calculation, could be interpreted as an increase of 160%, a little more than the stated 5.26%. My concern is the larger picture. In 2016, the New Zealand Taxpayers Union did an official information request that's been published on our website and asked how many complaints were directed to the Ombudsman. Given the simplicity of OI requirements, it should be concerning if there are any, aside from human error, the odd one will get through. Yet, that very informative performance measure was completely unknown. Of the estimated figures provided in response to that formal OI request, put it about 5%. So that's 5% resources consumed not complying with statutory provisions protecting the democratic principles of transparency and accountability. The numbers of affected people who don't or didn't complain to the Ombudsman are completely unknown. Now, as I speak, I know that the Ombudsman has required you to respond to four information requests that got buried. More complaints are being prepared. And that's in relation to matters concerning dogs, because I only focus on dogs and people who are concerned about dogs, and there's a group of us. One complaint lodged and more impending to the Privacy Commissioner. This is my concern. The cycle of consuming resources to not provide information that leads to consuming more resources, dealing with not having provided the information that then leads ultimately to the information still having to be provided. It's make work. And to be smart, we stop that cycle. Information is required for informed engagement to the public, and I'm closing down now, Sarah. As ratepayers, we need to fund information disclosure capability. We must give the operations side the ability to meet that need. But let's get it at the beginning. If you're doing a consultation, you need to provide the information. That means you don't have to face official information requests, and that means that you don't then get into the cycle I just described. We aren't required to fund non-disclosure that prevents discussion, and this is my final lengthy sentence here. Governance and support services has had a budget increase this year, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm actually supportive of that. But there's no evidence, there's no explicit disclosure supporting also increasing the ability to charge by reducing the number of free hours, increasing the amount that is charged above the Ministry of Justice recommendations, and obscuring those increases behind a significantly understated actual overall total increase. Those are changes that protect non-disclosure, hence the solutions I've suggested, sir, in my submission.
Questions, councillors? There is none, so thank you for your submission.
Thanks, sir.
That brings us to our afternoon break. So I will move that we adjourn the meeting and recommence at 3:20 promptly. Seconded, Councillor Hall. All in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, councillors, we will reconvene. So I will move that we reconvene the meeting. Seconded by Councillor Hall. All in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, that brings us to our next submitter, Mary O'Brien, CCS. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you very much.
If you can just pull that microphone there a bit towards you, or
yeah, there we are. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Cool. Your Worship and Councillors, I'm Mary O'Brien and I'm the Regional Access Coordinator for CCS Disability Action. Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that the Council is implementing more mobility parks in George Street. That's going to make a difference. I myself have really enjoyed and valued the consultation process around George Street and also being involved in the Working Party for New Play Spaces. So the next thing on our list is affordable, accessible public transport, and that will benefit all stakeholders, and that is right across the board, including councils. So public transport, affordable public transport creates benefits for everybody. It creates access to opportunities, social networks, and goods and services for people. And while we might take this for granted, if you can't actually catch the bus and you don't have a car, how do you access these services? Some of the benefits of public transport include a reduction in cardiovascular disease and improved mental health. And also, these outcomes are most likely related to the walking part of catching the bus, walking to and from the bus, and also increased participation. One of the things that prevents many people from travelling by bus is the cost. And this has a very detrimental effect on vulnerable people. Poor access to public transport reduces participation in health services and contributes to social exclusion. So these are all things that affect our local community. Increasing bus use by reducing the cost will contribute to other council goals, such as reducing car emissions, car use, and building a strong community. The introduction of a fat bus fare in Queenstown has resulted in an increase in bus patronage and revenue. And we believe that these benefits can be transferred to Dunedin, and that the Otago District Council and the Dunedin City Council recognise the broad benefits of this and reduce bus fares and introduce a free central city bus loop. This will mean that more people will be able to catch the bus, use the bus, and then when they access the city bus hub, they can go to the next step. We have received a lot of feedback about people who are concerned about being able to get to the hospital. And this includes people who are not well, people who are going for appointment, and people who just merely want to visit their family. One of the other questions the council asked was about improving footpaths. And we recognise that the council, like all other councils across the country, has a legacy of ageing footpaths which require improvement, and that addressing this is just a logistic and financial challenge. This is a problem nationwide. So to try and deal with this, CCS Disability Action collaborated with some traffic engineers who are involved in transport and community members with disabilities. And we developed a unique audit tool which incorporates engineering knowledge and expertise, the principles of universal design, and the lived experience of disability. So what this process does is basically work with the council to identify an area that needs to be audited, and then the auditor goes out and just identifies defects in the footpath or an absence of a mobility park or a bus stop, etc., that's not accessible, and then categorise them according to those which are going to cause a serious injury and defects which are barriers to access, but they can be dealt with in the existing maintenance. So when each council is scheduled to go out and do maintenance, then those items can be dealt with. So this provides the council also with costed and prioritised work schedule, and the councils then use these to schedule their maintenance. So it's just really a prioritised maintenance list which councils can use according to their budget. So following the street access audit and the resulting maintenance in the Waikato, mobility park permit holders were surveyed. Of this group, 58% for improvements in street accessibility, and within that group, 78% noticed better defined mobility parks, 24% noticed more mobility parks, 29% noticed improved curb cuts, 37% noticed better footpaths, and 20% noticed improved road crossing opportunities. Now these results are consistent within the councils that have used them. It's mostly been done in the Waikato because that was where it's developed, and this is a really effective use of your maintenance funding. Also means that the council can talk to the community and say, we've got a process for dealing with this, and we're doing it systematically. So just to conclude, we think that you can improve bus patronage by reducing fares and providing a free central city bus loop that will actually contribute to Dunedin becoming a greater small city. We would also like to work with you on this. We have partners and colleagues who have got the knowledge and the expertise to assist you should you require it. Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, Mary, I thought that was a pretty positive submission, and I didn't really disagree with a lot of anything you said, but I do have a question around, you talked about the problem that all councils have, which is a legacy of older roads and footpaths and that sort of thing, and I'm just wondering, I mean, like, I suppose I can't say I've walked every footpath in Dunedin, but generally I would say footpaths to me don't seem to be as in bad a shape as perhaps some roads would be, and I'm just wondering, is there certain areas that you're referring to that you think is particularly bad footpaths that you could give me for an example, or am I not seeing a problem that is a lot worse than it is, do you think?
I think the problem becomes with actually how you view it. I didn't think there were many issues until I started this role and then learnt more about it. So quite often it's that they're everywhere, you know, if you just, even a little upstand on the curb or a lip or something, if you've got to get up in your wheelchair and those sorts of things, it becomes very difficult. And it is a big problem across the country. That's really why it's a good idea to sit down with the council and work out what the areas are. So it would usually be looking at a central business district or areas where you've got more vulnerable people.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Ms O'Brien. And just in a conversation with you before, I learnt you have a mobility park app. I just wondered, is there a mechanism for updating that as we add these new mobility parks in? Will that happen as a matter of course?
Yes, that will. It's providing we know about them, I will go and upload.
So you've got a good liaison with our staff. Excellent, thank you.
And just to add that we've got a meeting next week with some of the council staff around using the app.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you very much.
Could I now invite Geraldine Tate? Yes, just grab one of the live microphones.
I've got my own laptop, I suddenly felt really important. It's got your area in there, sort of. Oh, lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know you're probably all very tired. It's stuffy in here, and you'd probably rather be somewhere else, having a beer at the local pub. But anyway, I've just got two quick issues I wanted to raise. Thank goodness. A very long time ago, in a place called South Dunedin, there used to be a thing called a Barnes dance at Cargill's Corner. This is probably before most of you were born. And it was a really marvellous thing. The lights would change and all the Morris miners and the Bedfords trucks would screech to a halt and the pedestrians could cross the road whichever way they liked. And when the people got to the middle, the ladies would curtsy and the gentlemen would toff their hats and they would do a little do-si-do and then they would carry on and everyone was safe and then the cars and the trucks would head off on their way too. And that was terribly, terribly fantastic. And then someone in a traffic department in a city council not too far away from where we're sitting today had a brilliant idea of speeding up the traffic. And so they said, let's get rid of that silly old Barnes dance. And the people in South Dunedin all sighed and some of them cried into their handkerchiefs. And then ever since then, it's been quite a dangerous place. It's a very high traffic area for people that are walking, elderly people, people with disabilities. And it's been very sad ever since then. And since that time, some very big box retailers and enormous supermarkets have been built in the area. And the bus service is absolutely completely appalling. There is no bus stops whatsoever along that stretch of road where the warehouse and the pack and slave are. So, and people still need to cross the road, and unlike George Street where the school got its own little press button and children could safely cross, there's no such thing in the middle of that stretch of road. So I've come to beg you to consider, and I don't know if it's on a plan, it might already been a plan and that would be fantastic and I'll say hip hip hooray and go away, but to reconsider. You've spent a lot of money in town and it's fabulous, and as a mean nasty car driver I love going through town now because I have to stop and wait, and all those silly pedestrians have to stop and wait and we get our turn, and then it's quite safe for me to drive and I don't have to give way when I'm going around a corner. I can just zip around there because the pedestrians are all corralled and they're waiting for their turn. So it's worked really well, and I'm sure others of you feel the same, that it has worked really well. And I'm sure they're terribly expensive, those new flashing lights with the people and the timers and all the rest of that. And the other little corner that we need to consider is the one at McAndrew Bay and King Edward Street, because the fabulous news is after waiting hundreds of years, the people of South Dunedin are about to get a new library, and it's going to be on that corner opposite the pub. So if we're thinking about putting in a new lighting system, which I hope it will go on the priority list in the next 5 minutes, please put one at both corners, because those will both be very high pedestrian areas, which will be much, much safer. So that's my talk about that. I did look at your plans and all sorts of things and read all sorts of wonderful things about pedestrian safety and how that's a priority for the city. And then I discovered that this city is one of the worst areas for safety for pedestrians in New Zealand, which was quite shocking because we're not a very big city and we don't really have that much traffic compared to places like Wellington and Auckland. But apparently we're pretty good at knocking people over and even killing some. So we have no reason to say no and not be concerned about pedestrians. My other wee request today is to raise the issue of entertainment and things that young people can do for free. If you're a parent of a teenager or anyone over about the age of 12, it costs a hell of a lot of money to entertain them. There's movie theatres and all sorts of things, but there are very few parks or recreational facilities that are free that are catering specifically to that age group. Now, I had the good fortune last year to go with my tiny little grandson to the new Margaret Mayhew Playground. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's the most amazing and fabulous place. So if you're ever in Christchurch, you have to go there. It's in the middle of town. It was breathtaking. And not only was it fantastic for my 1.5-year-old grandson, but it was amazing for right up to 18-year-olds. It was extremely challenging. It has really high up, wobbly, scary stuff, which little kids can't actually access. And then it has things that little kids like to play with. Dunedin really has nothing like this. And a lot of places, even like in Gore, 11k out of Gore, there's a fabulous outdoor recreation area, which is kind of a beautiful park, camping area. And they have some fabulous outdoor, challenging, high up, wobbly stuff for young people. So it's not just the big fancy cities. A lot of places around New Zealand have quite challenging adventure playgrounds with really good flying foxes and really high, scary, wobbly, climby things. We have a few dotted around the city, but nothing in one place. Now, my area in Waikato Coast, I'm sure we could find space for it, but I'm not saying please give it to us. I just think it becomes a destination. It will be far more value to our community and to our young people than a very expensive bridge to nowhere that doesn't really, you can't slide down it and you can't climb up it and you can't jump off it. So I think if you would really want to spend lots of money, this would be a really worthwhile thing. A few years ago, there was a revamp of a lot of playgrounds and our area came up, a lucky number came up, and we got to sort of try and suggest some ideas. And I tried to suggest that older people, older children and youth needed to focus, and all we got was kind of play equipment that was for the little toddlers. And certainly we have got some great playgrounds for the younger children. We have very little for older people. I used to live in Christchurch. There's an area called Spencer Park, and I did a little bit of looking, investigating into that. I'm going to finish soon. And it has, I remember, fabulous flying foxes. Well, I had a re-look at that, and it's an amazing recreation area. They cater for horse riders, they cater for motorbikes, they cater for cyclists, they cater for walkers, they cater for people that love nature, and they've got a camping area and a wildlife park and a huge, scary, high up, wobbly play area. So I think Dunedin's a wee bit behind the times that we haven't actually. There's some areas like that are privately run or run by trusts, but they're not accessible to the general public to just go in there and have fun with their older kids. So I think it needs to be something that the city, it would bring people in to the city. It could be a destination thing, it was near to town, or it could be a great thing for our youth if it's parents will drive for miles to find somewhere they can let their teenagers loose, I assure you. So those are my two things I wanted to talk about.
Councillor O'Malley.
There's no one from infrastructure here to answer this question, but I have a rough answer of it, and that is that the Barnes dance at Cargill's Corner was considered, and considered the traffic flows were too high to put one in again. And there's also work to be done on that intersection in the next couple of years. So what I would ask you, do you want us to ask again to reconsider that, and also to reconsider now that the community hub has been identified at being on the corner of King Edward and McAndrew, that we start looking at that section of King Edward Street from McAndrew all the way down to Hillside, and maybe obviously a little bit on the other. And this came up to another submitter earlier on, under the same kind of lens that we're looking at other major streets in Dunedin, like we are at George and Princess.
We absolutely have to. I mean, it's an area that's been, the planners have really let the area down because they've allowed all the big box to go in there with massive car parks that aren't even very friendly to pedestrians to walk to. That newer countdown, you can't even exit from King Edward Street. There's little quiet little back streets that there should have been a walkway through to the back end of the store and then walk round. If you're a pedestrian, you have to go right the way round, which is a real pain in the neck. I think, you know, all those designs have allowed to be submitted for resource consent by those big box retail and department and supermarkets without any consideration for pedestrians and pedestrian safety whatsoever. And I find it absolutely appalling because some of them are very new within the era that we're supposed to take those things into account, and they haven't been. So yeah, the library will be a destination, and I absolutely think if we want to breathe some life back into South Dunedin, you've got to make it pedestrian friendly. And it currently isn't.
Councillor Elder.
Hi. Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you for putting the idea of barn dance. I was just wondering, a question I have, and something I noticed when I was in Christchurch was, in fact, that there were many different parks in many different communities, because access is a problem for people in lower socioeconomic, and also having one big park means everybody's driving there. Having lots of parks that are really good in communities means those communities will use them all the time. So I'm just wondering whether, in fact, if on balance it would be better to have lots of good parks in communities rather than having one big one, what we spend lots and lots of money on, and get everybody to drive to. Your thoughts on that?
I know what you're saying, but I think we already have got some lovely children's playgrounds and recreational. Dunedin's just got fabulous beaches and wonderful places to take families. But as kids get older, they kind of want action. They don't just want to go for a walk on the beach with mum and dad. That's really boring. You know, I'm going to go to the movies, give them some money. You know, so actually if you can take them somewhere where they can expend quite a lot of energy, and it may be a school holiday thing or a weekend thing, yeah, maybe it needs to be on a bus route, but I don't think we can afford to have 5 or 6 of these. We've got a couple of skate parks in Dunedin, you know, the main one behind the railway station and one at Mosgiel, but we haven't got a lot of those sorts of facilities. So I'm not the one to say how it should look. I just think we desperately need to look at that age group, free stuff that is adventurous, gets them off their jolly little devices and gets them out in the fresh air, and it's challenging. And it's got to be high up and wobbly and scary, or it's boring and they won't want to go. So, you know, yep, we don't really want people driving all over the place. Some people can't afford that. Maybe it needs to be in South Dunedin or somewhere where it would be accessible to people that have less opportunity for transport.
I agree that challenge is needed, and also there have been thoughts about also equipment that is for people with disability and older people.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think we all love playgrounds, and I think there are swings now for wheelchairs, and I've seen those in certain places, so that's really cool. Yeah, I think if you build it big and strong and with a range of equipment, then it's going to fit a range of people. But yeah, I think it's a mindset, and I don't know that there is currently a budget or an inspiration to do this. And I think it's something that would be really cool if the city put on its list of priorities to think that this is an age group, and all sorts of people will use it if it's there.
I agree. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you, Geraldine. Our next submitter is Tanya Sherry Williams.
Kia tau te rangi Māori e ki runga i a tātou katoa, utia te rito o te harakeke, kai hea te ko māko e ko ki mai ki ahau. Hea te mea nui o te ao, māku e ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. No reira, ti hei mauri ora, ko whānau paki te maunga, ko kaikarai te aua, ko raituru te marae, ko raituru te waka, ko ngā iwi o ngā haue whā te iwi, ko te hapu o raituru. No reira, tēnei te mihi nunui a ki a koutou katoa. Ko waio, e tūana kei hui a koutou, ko Tanya Sherry Williams. Kia ora. My name is Tanya, and I am here to be a voice piece for the Araituru Marae. I'll just have a seat. Greetings to each and every one of you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. I'm here today to be a mouthpiece for our marae, which I consider embodies the slogan, I am Dunedin. The history, if you don't know of Araituru Marae, comes from when our ancestors were overseas fighting in the overseas wars. And as Māori people, we all belong to our own different tribal and sub-tribal maraes. The great concept of Araituru is it is a place for all people. And as you may or may not be aware, that it embodies not only Māori people, but people from all around the nations. In the last 3 years, we've had the privilege of supporting the refugee community that have been coming from Syria Afghan, the Kurdish people, and I pay homage to the marae for the space that it creates to bring in people from all around the world to weave us together as one people. As the council, it's important that you recognise that Dunedin plays, that the Araituru Marae plays a special role in this community. Just recently, with the terrible murders that we had in Christchurch, Araituru Marae opened the doors on the Saturday to invite all people to come and to have a space to grieve and to, you know, join together as one to face those atrocities. We have just recently had a tangi with an Indian man who was of the Seventh-day Adventists. The reason that I bring these things to your minds is because if you don't have a relationship with us, then you don't really know what happens at our marae. So we have people from all around the world that feel disconnected from their own homelands, but when they're welcomed into our marae, it gives them a place of feeling connected home here in Dunedin. It's an Indigenous space. And people who come from Indigenous backgrounds require that type of space to feel full and to have certain elements of themselves nurtured. And that's what we provide at Araituru Marae. What I need help with from the DCC is sustainability. The difference between Araituru Marae and the Papatuku Marae, the Runanga Marae or the maraes from Kaitahu is that we are voluntary basis. So as the chairperson here speaking to you on behalf of the marae, I also work a full-time job. Everything that I do to take care of the marae is a full-time job in itself, and I do that as an unpaid worker, along with my treasurer. There's things that I have addressed the council about on a number of times, first being when you brought the 10-year planning hui to Araituru Marae a couple of years ago for the Māori community's involvement. At that time, I supplied all the information that I've put in this draft copy here. The most important things for me today is that we get our signage corrected. The signage that we have to our marae goes to our next door neighbour's house. And often our neighbours are having to greet our visitors, which is not okay. The second thing that I find is that a lot of manuhiri, when they come to Dunedin, they actually don't know how to find Araituru Marae. And so again, I've suggested that maybe some signage from the airport coming into Dunedin would be helpful for visitors from out of town. The other things that I'd like to bring up, and I know that we can't cover everything that I've put in there today, but what's important is I'd like to see some identification as a Māori here within the CBD. I brought this up to Dave Cole a few years ago to ask him, where am I as a Māori in this town? I cannot see myself. And when we talk about partnership, we've got Robbie Burns sitting in the octagon there, but he came after my ancestors. And so I'd like to see, and I've given different ideas of things that we could put around this town, and I know that the talks have been happening with the Māori Working Party as well, to have maybe a carved po down at the railway station or maybe in the octagon here, which has signage like we see in many other places, but directing people to show them where our marae are. For me, everybody should experience a pōhiri. Everybody should be coming through a marae. And if you haven't had the opportunity as councillors to come to the marae, then I invite you to come along in June to our next Manaakitanga Pōhiri program, which you are supporting us with, where we bring all people who have never had the opportunity to experience the Māori culture into our marae. And for the last, in the last Manaakitanga Pōhiri program we had, which was the day after the shootings, we had Dougal, the local piper, who was the kaikaranga and for the manuhiri side. So it's a real multicultural mix, and it's about respecting and acknowledging the beauty of each other's cultures. That's what Araituru Marae is for this town. It's a place where people of all faiths, of all religions, of all cultures can come and we can be together as one. It's a spiritual house. So once you go through the pōhiri process with us, it takes down a lot of those walls that we might have or judgments that we may have. It drops them away because we've gone through a spiritual process and we come as just spiritual beings and are able to connect to each other. I don't know if I'm imprinting this strong enough into your minds how vitally important that is. especially going forward, considering the state of the consciousness of our people at the moment, with the fear of still having to see guns out on our streets. We need a place that's safe, where we can all feel that we're listened to, and I believe Araitiuri Marae offers us the opportunity to create that space. And I back that up by the fact that the Muslim community and the police asked Araitiuri Marae to open up their doors to allow the members of council and those leaders in the community that needed to come and talk about what had happened at the mosque to make their pathway forward. That happened at Araitiuri Marae. So I need your help in terms of maybe it is you could look after the lawns for me. Maybe the contractors for the DCC could come and take care of that stuff. You know, and once again, I really want to press that a lot of the information that I've put into the submission, I've gifted over a number of years, and I'd really like to see some movement on that, especially to do with the street signage. That's really important. You know yourself, if you're inviting guests around to your house, you don't want them to go to 76 if you live in 74, and everybody in 76 is continuously receiving your guests. Yes, that's, the heart and the passion of Araitiuri Marae, as I said, is held by unpaid workers. That shows the commitment that we have to the culture and to this town to uphold and maintain a place of peace and a place of welcoming for all the people. So everything that I've put forward, if there's any way that you as councillors can assist me in this year and assist the marae, we'd be grateful for that. I thank you for your time, taking the time to listen to me. He waka eke noa. We're all on this waka together whānau. We're all members of this wonderful town. And may I just leave off the final piece, which is at the end of my submission, which is I think it would be a really awesome idea if we commissioned artists to create a piece of art that was reflective of the diversity of the cultures that we have in this town, so that all cultures are put onto that one piece of artwork, so we can see the ability that we have to connect with each other and work together as the human family. Nō reira, kanui te mihi ki a koutou katoa, nō reira, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Questions, councillors? There appears to be none. Oh, Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I note that you talked about that hui the other year to do with annual plan, and so something I've brought up before is would that be helpful to have every year, a hui with
the council?
Yeah.
It would be helpful if I seen results come from it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So because we're all busy people, I don't want to continue to have meetings and then I don't see any manifestation of activities that come from the hui. Pai?
Pai.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Tēnā koutou. Kia ora.
Could I welcome our next submitter, Vivian Gray? Not here. Tess Trotter? Tess, welcome to the table. We'll take you ahead of time.
Kia ora everybody. My name is Tess Trotter and I'm the leader for the Valley Project. It's a small community development project located in North East Valley. And we have people, it's part of our community from the North East Valley, Opaho and Pine Hill areas and all the surrounding little suburbs. I made a very short submission, mostly in favour of the proposals in the annual plan. But I felt that it was important to be face-to-face with decision makers as well. I presume you've read the submission? Yep. So from our perspective, we enjoy great support from the City Council in terms of collaboration and also in terms of the place-based funding that we received last year. Our desire is to continue to work very closely with Council, and in particular around parks and recreation. The environment is a very important part of our community, and it's something that our community appreciates very strongly and wants to be able to contribute to improving our environment, particularly around biodiversity. To that end, when we're using our public spaces, it would also be very useful if there were amenities available. And in particular, Chingford Park and the use of toilets has been raised with me time and again. And I have spoken to numerous people, numerous staff in council about this issue. I understand it as part of a longer term plan, looking at parks in the next sort of 5 years. I have asked where we could funnel the feedback that has come to us on a weekly basis from members of the community. And I was told to advise them to send an email to complaints@DCC. My understanding is that many people have done that, but unfortunately, I'm the person that the community come back to re-emphasise the points that they're trying to make, and hence why I included it in my submission.
Councillor O'Malley.
Hey Tess, how are you?
Thanks.
Something I've asked of other place-based community groups, and I know the answer, but I'm asking it again so you hear the answer.
Sure.
Is there an opportunity for place-based community groups to act in that very role you just talked about, where in other areas there's community boards, and if someone has a pothole that needs to be fixed, they not only just contact the DCC, but they make sure that somebody in another place can follow that up. Do you, and the toilets in Chingford Park would be a really good example of that, do you think it would be useful if the place-based group that operates in that area, so in your case the Valley Project, has the capacity to be able to interact with staff in the same way that the community boards can, so that your role would be like that of a community board chair in the ability to be able to take these ideas to the council so they can be conglomerated with you, sorted, and then moved forward?
Yeah, I think there's real value in that. My concern is that our capacity is very small, and so I think that would be incredibly useful to the community. I think it would be efficient. I think it would be useful to the council. I'm just not sure how I'd find the hours in the day, that's the thing. But having said that, I'm using hours in the day, not getting anywhere at the moment.
Yeah, and that would be a fair take that a lot of community board chairs would say as well. I mean, it is a fair burden, but it is an opportunity to get it into one spot.
Yeah, I agree.
Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Elder.
Just a quick thing. Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about thinking about our other suburbs when it comes to recreation. Can you talk to
Sure. So that was in response to some of the questions in the submission process around whether or not we supported upgrades to the city centre in St Clair. And so my point was we would like to make sure that everywhere is considered in terms of upgrades to amenities for people. Yeah.
Thank you.
No other questions? Thank you for your submission.
Thank you.
I think we may have run out of submitters. In that case, councillors, could I? Yep. No. Pardon? Yeah, we're waiting. There's no one here. So to use the time usefully, I'd just like to clarify how we go forward. Now, at the beginning of our meeting, there were questions about, how do we go about getting informational reports? So what I would like you to give some thought of, what are the things that you would see that you wished some more information on? And secondly, after that, which things do you feel that you need a report on? Now, if you're wanting a report on something, I need you to have a seconder, and it will be open for debate, because there is, in the time between now and deliberations, the staff are under a lot of pressure, so we need to be of one voice if we're asking for additional work.
Can you staff have a... Would it be helpful to know what we have got planned?
Yes.
Yes, would that help?
Yes.
Tammy, have you got the summary page that we had from our meeting earlier? That's fine. I thought I had the summary list, but we've rushed over. But so we've got an overview of the annual plan community engagement report. We've got a summary of the community feedback.
we've got a report that consolidates all of the funding requests. So the ones where funding has been specified in a dollar amount, and those where there's been a request but it's unspecified. Well, that's more problematic because there was a limited amount of information provided, so that is put in as an unspecified item in the draft report because there wasn't a level of detail. But where Ngāi Tahu, for example, asked for a specific amount of money, that's been identified. We then have, there are all the group reports for each of the activity areas that look at the specific issues associated with each of those areas. On top of that, there are the reports that were requested earlier in the year. So we have Central City Bus Loop Trial, offset of bus fares, St Clair Esplanade, integrated transport strategy, track audit, living wage, funding for Targa Museum, the resource consent matter and the fees and charges, and the weighbridge issue as well, whether or not that may yet make it into the waste management group report. It may not be a separate report. So that's the work that is coming to you, just so you know.
Well, it sounds to me, and it's likely that you've probably picked up on most things where there's specific requests or non-specific requests. I'm just wondering in terms of process, I've got a list here, and it's not exclusive, but it might be the most efficient way if I were to just send that to Ms Graham, and others could do the same, just to say, have these topics been picked up? I mean, you know, the request about the town bell, or the request from the Baxter Trust, or the Broad Bay Yacht Club, you know, and I assume yet they have been, but it would be good for us to just, as a counter check to what you've compiled, for us to throw those in your direction.
In a serious lapse of judgment, I allowed Ms Graham to swan off to the United States tomorrow, so it might be wise for you to send it to me if you want somebody to see it prior to deliberations.
Our list is pretty comprehensive, but that said, there may be the odd thing that we've missed, so if you want to check now would be useful.
Well, what is the Chief Executive say to...
So please send a list, and then we'll compile it, and we'll have a discussion amongst what we can do and what we can't do. There's some things where we've already been emailing staff about information and where we can provide memos or a bit of detail. Ones that require reports with detailed financial assessment and stuff might be a little more tricky. So we'll go through those and then we'll come back to you as a block and say, okay, this is what's easy and this is what's somewhat difficult or impossible, and we'll just maybe take it from there. We'll do that by email and then put those things... We'll put they need to be made public at some point, the list. So.
There's an overarching budget update report. So we've got
we can put it all in there.
The funding report, and then some of the overarching budget things. There's been tweaks as we've reviewed some of the budgets that were presented at the start of this process. So that will be summarised in a reasonably comprehensive report that shows the changes that have been made in each of the areas. And that will also look, is the capital stuff going to be in that same report? And that will also include an update on the capital program, and some of these items will feed into that. So there's quite a raft of reports already on their way.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Things that are operational, as simple as moving a sign for a marae, or engagement with Pacifica in order that they're in a better position to consult with for the next long-term plan, perhaps. Those aren't necessarily things that we can put in dollar amount on, but if they are the will of the council that we prioritise those, how do we do that? Because I don't necessarily want to come up with a sum.
I think you move a motion in deliberations, but if you want to email as one of the things on the list to say, for example, how much money would you have to put in order to make a meaningful difference in consultation in the Pacifica community, for example, then you put that in the list.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hawkins,
No, just to ask whether anything that's been sent through up until this point can just be added to that list and save us the hassle of, I mean, if this is now the process that we're just emailing stuff through and it'll get picked up or put in the two hub basket between now and deliberations. Is that what I'm...
My recommendation is you would send it again just to make sure it doesn't get lost.
That's fine, thank you.
Can everyone turn their speakers off if they're not talking to? That'd be useful.
Councillor Elder.
So, just to clarify the process for me, sometimes I'm a bit slow in picking things up, that would be that some of the stuff we've seen and talked about today, if all of us sort of put something forward that we think needs to be followed up on, is that right?
And not just from the people who have come. You
But
have to
from
give
the
equal
submissions.
weighting to all the submissions.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly.
Anything that you send through has to be submissions based at this point?
Yes.
So it has to be just a check that we have included it. If you
Yes.
want something other than that, then deliberations is the point where you raise that as you debate the various submissions and make your decisions.
Okie dokie.
And that would involve you moving a motion, getting the support of your colleagues, and then looking at where.
So then will we be updated with that new list, you know, before?
So the list isn't a new list. The list is simply staff identifying the funding requests from the submissions, be they oral submissions or the written submissions.
Okay.
And consolidating them into a single report so that councillors can look at how they want to weigh up a request from the Pacifica community, for example, with one for extra track resources or, you know, a new hockey turf.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Some of my questions already been answered, and that was around the very small, really big to the organisation, but very small in terms of what we can do. That was around the sign moving, because that kind of thing could be done presumably quite quickly within a current budget. So
yep, but if you
send them
still
through.
put it through,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
the answer might be actually, look, we can just do that next week.
Yeah, that's right. So, but the other question I have is, what about things like we heard from Simon around Fraser's Gully, and that plans are in place. There was a number of those through the submission where there's already work happening or has happened. So will that be
So the standard
identified
approach
too?
for submissions is, of course, that the submissions all go to staff along with a staff answer. So if this work is already scheduled and this is roughly when it will be carried out, and as you were told in that meeting, then that will be the reply that staff are pulling together and will go to the submitters, and it's contained within the existing budgets.
So timing for that, because some of the submissions, it said in the comments, still making the comments.
So staff have a deadline of the 10th of May to have all the comments into the database.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
I think I'm answered, but so just good example. Chris Ford talks about telephone voting. I just say he mentioned it in the oral. Is it captured? Is that?
I think that's a central government issue rather than ours.
Well, I mean,
but
there's
put it on the
does
list
he,
and
but
we'll
he
come back with
submitted,
the
does he
answer.
get an answer?
Put it on the list and we'll come back with an answer.
Right, that's what yeah.
Mr. Benson-Pope.
And in terms of process, I'm assuming that if something hasn't been raised in submissions, it's not on the list anywhere. That's fine.
But it won't be on any of the stuff submissions related, but you are deliberating on the annual plan. And so if it's covered in the annual plan.
Well, I don't think we have any submitters arrived, so we do need to stay until 4:20. So I will adjourn the meeting, or move that we adjourn the meeting until 4:20. Seconded, Councillor Lord. All in favour? Against? Carried. Councillors? Councillors? I will move that we reconvene the meeting. Seconded, Councillor Wiley. All in favour? We do not have any other submitters. The time that the last submitter was meant to arrive was 4:20. So thank you for your input and for your questioning. And we look forward to the deliberations, and I will close the meeting. Thank you.